It seems to be common knowledge in the Dragon Ball fanbase that Dragon Ball GT, the direct-to-animation follow-up to the ever-so-popular Dragon Ball Z anime, is the metaphorical black sheep of the franchise. Personally, I scoff at that idea, due in no small part to the existence of this.
I swear to God!
To get back on track, around 2 years ago, I started a full rewatch of the original Dragon Ball anime. Originally starting with the intention of that show alone, I soon decided to make it a full rewatch of the entire franchise. Well, at least everything consisting of the original run, for obvious reasons. Starting from the very beginning of Dragon Ball, all throughout Dragon Ball Z, and recently finishing up episode 64 of the more commonly ignored and controversial Dragon Ball GT, it's safe to say that I have a lot I want to talk about. Let's tackle what I just said. The more commonly ignored and controversial Dragon Ball GT. But first, a history lesson. Back in 1996, leading off of the success of the immensely profitable Dragon Ball Z, Toei Animation, the company responsible for turning the series from manga to anime, was excited for more. However, that sentiment was not shared by the original author of the manga, Akira Toriyama, who insisted on ending the series after its exhaustive run in 1984 to 1995. 11 years of writing a series that was originally intended to end after only a couple of months was very taxing on him, and he expressed no interest in continuing the series proper any longer. Toei, incapable of taking no for an answer, decided to make their own sequel series entitled Dragon Ball GT. The GT, just like the Z in Dragon Ball Z, was a Toriyama suggestion, and has a meaning behind it. For anyone aware of that awful dub intro they made for the English localization of the series, the GT stands for Grand Tour, or Grand Touring depending on your source. This name was chosen as a reference to the three main leads, Goku, Trunks, and Pan, and their grand tour throughout the universe. The series, at least for a little while, focused on them collecting the Dragon Balls once again to save the Earth from annihilation like usual. After some concept art and character designs were given to Toei by Big Daddy Dragon Ball himself, production on the soon-to-be smash hit series was officially underway. A series about action, adventure, heartbreak, and with the emotional burden of ending the franchise forever, this was going to be a huge success. Dragon Ball GT has gone down in history as one of the worst shows ever produced. Hundreds of thousands of people make it their daily mission to vitriolically hate this series with every fiber of their being. Fans of the show are mercilessly mocked for even daring to say anything positive about this insultingly flawed production. This show was terrible. I'm gonna stop there because I have something to admit. I actually kind of like GT.
What the heck?
Now don't worry, I have an argument. But before I get into that, I think it's important to address this. Was Dragon Ball GT actually good? Well, for various reasons, that's debatable. My goal today is to explain just what went wrong with this series, and why I believe that it doesn't get some of the praise it deserves. It is my personal belief that Dragon Ball GT was doomed to fail from the very beginning. Not due to its contents necessarily, but due entirely to poor timing. I'm sure you're well aware of the idea of franchise fatigue. That being, when a particular thing goes on for too long, you just get sick of it. Spongebob is a great example of this. Spongebob is a series that is well past its prime. Nickelodeon and Viacom only keep it alive due to its glorified money printer status, not out of any honest intent to make good content. That isn't to say that GT is not good, more on that later, but rather, by the time that Dragon Ball Z was ending, people were getting tired. The series ran non-stop week after week for 10 years straight. It didn't help that most of that was artificially extended time due to problems with properly pacing the anime as a means of not catching up to the manga. A lot of people say that Dragon Ball GT was so bad that it killed interest in the franchise. In reality, interest was already dwindling during the latter half of the final arc of the series proper, the Majin Buu arc, with the biggest drop-off point being the fight between Vegeta and Majin Buu. Unlike the fan theory, plenty of sources support this idea. By the time that GT came around, more Dragon Ball was the last thing on most people's minds. People also state the premature cancellation of the series to be evidence of people not enjoying the show. To that I have to say this. That is not why shows are cancelled. If companies went off of viewer reception, SpongeBob would have ended back in 2004. Yes, viewer reception is definitely important to keep people coming back, but the real source of the problem was something a lot more serious. The real killer of a series is how well it performs commercially, or, in all honesty, the lack thereof. For the majority of anime, the existence of merchandise is a huge deal marketing-wise. In fact, it has become commonplace nowadays for there to be a 131 episode long commercial on what toys you should be buying, alongside Alongside toys, anime usually exists to boost the sale of the respective manga. In Dragon Ball GT's case, where there was no source manga, money had to be made exclusively through the toy market, and the unfortunate truth was that not enough people were interested in buying said toys. If you've watched my previous video, you'll be aware of my very clearly not deep sexual feelings towards the re-edit of the Dragon Ball Z anime, Dragon Ball Kai. Unfortunately for it was also experiencing marketing troubles. People were just not interested in watching the admittedly unnecessary and sometimes censored re-edit of a show that has not been relevant for 20 years, despite how amazing that show's score was, in all of its plagiarized glory. Dragon Ball Kai began in 2009 and ran until 2011 due to its premature cancellation. Ironically, the series made a return 3 years later in 2014 and running until 2015 to finish off the last arc of the series, due to the fact that Kai's replacement, Toriko, performed even worse commercially. Moving away from Kai, another complaint I hear often about why GT should be sent down to the lowest levels of Sugoroku space is that the show is just not interesting story-wise. A common thing I hear about GT is that it is a show with excellent ideas, but horrible execution. While I do agree that the series has some of the best ideas brought to the franchise, I can't agree with the idea that the execution was all that bad. Let me direct your attention to one of my favorite story arcs in Dragon Ball history, the second of the 4 main arcs that comprise Dragon Ball GT, the one arc that many people who openly despise the show acknowledge as a competent story. To no one's surprise, I'm talking about the Baby arc, arguably the best example of a revenge plot ever written in the Dragon Ball franchise. One thing I very much appreciate about Dragon Ball GT is its insistence of creating arcs based off of seemingly one-off lines spoken in seemingly one-off scenarios. In fact, it's done to an extent where it's almost comedic. Quite possibly the best example is a minor line in the Majin Buu arc, where the Elder Kaioshin says to the gang that he doesn't trust the use of the Dragon Balls. Toei decided to take that line literally, and make the Dragon Balls the final challenge for our team to overcome in their eternal quest for Earth's safety. However, due to the series' premature cancellation, I will agree that the execution on that front fell flat. The final villain doesn't even show up until mere episodes before the series is over. Granted, when it comes to the final episode of GT, they absolutely stuck the landing, but that's a topic for another day. During the Saiyan arc of the Dragon Ball Z anime, Toei Animation asked Toriyama to give more insight on the backstory of the Saiyans. In response, he wrote a short manuscript focusing on a now extinct race of aliens, named the Sufurians, that used to inhabit planet Vegeta before those barbaric Saiyans stole their planet from them. Where the Sufurians had the edge on technology, they were no match for the brute force and tenacity of the Saiyans, and were unfortunately killed off in a war to decide who should inhabit the planet. Toei decided to adapt that into a filler scene during the year leading up to the Saiyan invasion, in which Kaio tells Goku a story about what happened at planet Vegeta all those years ago. Dragon Ball has a history of doing revenge plots before this. The most obvious, but also arguably most unexplored, was the connection between the Red Ribbon Army and the artificial humans. But no revenge story felt as natural as Baby's. As a brief recap for all those who need it, Baby is a machine mutant, created by the Sufurians in an attempt to get revenge on the Saiyans for stealing their home planet. He was also specifically created as a parasitic life form who could take control of other people's bodies in order to make them do whatever he pleases. Through a lot of intergalactic shenanigans, Goku, Trunks, and Pan stumble across Dr. Mew, the evil scientist who has worked tirelessly all this time to awaken Baby from his slumber and achieve his mission of exterminating every last Saiyan in the universe. In a cruel twist of fate, due to planet Vegeta, alongside the majority of the Saiyans, being destroyed by Frieza decades prior, the only Saiyans left to kill are the ones who were able to escape, and due to unique circumstances, also happen to be the only ones who don't deserve it. In a way, Baby is a righteous hero, righting the wrongs inflicted upon his people by finally getting revenge on the ones who caused him so much pain. But due to his overwhelming convictions and drive to exterminate the Saiyans, he is only the villain because he desires the death of what has now become the innocent. Now, to be completely fair, I don't think the writers thought as deeply about this arc as I did. Sometimes Baby does act stereotypically evil. Now, that could easily be taken as Baby's blind thirst for revenge clouding his judgment, turning him from a righteous hero to simply a cold-hearted villain. Or maybe it's just a coincidence. I have no idea. It doesn't stop me from finding it intriguing. Also, and I'm sorry to just gush about this right now, but Baby is also just really cool. I love his crazy design, his cool techniques. He's been on my wishlist for Dragon Ball FighterZ for a while now. He's one of my favorite Dragon Ball villains, and I wish he got the spotlight more often. Now, obviously I wouldn't have made this video about GT as a whole if I was just going to talk about how cool of a villain Baby was. I'd like to get back on the idea of great concepts and terrible execution. It's no secret that the arc that had the most wasted potential was the final arc of Dragon Ball GT, the Evil Dragons arc. The concept behind this arc is another fantastic one. It turns out that the Dragon Balls, our favorite magic wish-granting orbs, can only be used so many times before they build up too much minus energy. Usually, this minus energy dissipates with time, taking upwards of a century. This was never a problem for them, as it would always take so long for the Dragon Balls to be collected and used. However, due to the excessive use of them over only a few decades, the minus energy manifests into creating 7 different evil dragons. Now it is up to Goku, Pan, and not Trunks, because he stopped being relevant 2 arcs ago, to save the day and restore peace to the Earth. As I mentioned before, due to the sudden cancellation of the series, the arc had to be cut short. And in the end, most of the evil dragon fights ended up becoming an extremely formulaic villain of the week scenario. For several consecutive episodes, Goku and Pan find a dragon, fight it, and purify the respective Dragon Ball. Up until now, I've been almost entirely positive about GT, and sadly, this is where I must bring up my main criticism with it. Dragon Ball GT at its best is incredibly well written and very fun to watch, but at its worst, it is painfully boring. The only reason why I took so long to finish GT the second time around was because I took a 2-month break in the middle of the Evil Dragons arc, simply because I just couldn't be bothered to watch another episode. I think the unfortunate reality about Dragon Ball GT is that even if it is only by a smidgen, GT is often more boring than entertaining. I've made it no secret throughout this video that I have rather extreme feelings about another Dragon Ball sequel series. People often bring up the question of which series is better, Dragon Ball GT or Dragon Ball Super. Typically the answer ends up being Super, and I understand why. Without Dragon Ball Super, this video could not exist. Super is what piqued my interest in the franchise again, and got me to actually pay attention to the franchise I was watching, and not just mindlessly going along with everything because of bright colors and funny shapes. However, I do believe in my honest opinion that Dragon Ball GT is a superior series to Dragon Ball Super for one main reason. Excluding the parts that I enjoy, like the aforementioned Baby, alongside things in Super I really enjoy, like Zamasu as a character and Ultra Instinct, GT has never made me angry. If Dragon Ball GT's biggest problem was the fact that it got painfully boring, Super's biggest problem is the fact that it has, on numerous occasions, made me angry as a Dragon Ball fan. Anything like pointlessly ruining the storyline of an otherwise fine arc to coming up with ridiculous explanations for old events, Super can be pretty rough sometimes. It's true that the best of Super is pretty amazing, but I'd rather watch something that bores me than something that makes me question if I should ever be a fan of the franchise. One thing I have yet to mention is how atypical Dragon Ball GT is to the traditional Dragon Ball formula. Yeah, in retrospect, a lot of plot points were borrowed from previous material, but one thing it is great at is just being really weird. Whenever I expected it to zig, it zagged. Especially in the first arc of the series, the Dark Dragon Balls arc. Sometimes the weirdness can get so intense and the plot points can be so unrelated that I struggle to see it as Dragon Ball. Other times it seems right at home due to early Dragon Ball's similar nature. In Dragon Ball Super's case, the show likes to take a very safe approach in what to be. It is very rare to see anything in Super that is even remotely original. If GT is a show with great ideas and bad execution, Super is a show with already explored ideas and incredibly safe executions. Dragon Ball GT tries so hard to be original that it struggles to be Dragon Ball, whereas Dragon Ball Super tries so hard to be Dragon Ball that it struggles to be original. Personally, I would rather watch someone try their hardest to make something great work out in an unconventional or potentially stupid way, than to watch something so incredibly safe that it gets downright insulting. I've been talking all this time without once mentioning the English side of things. Everything up until now has been about story concepts and the consequences of its cancellation, all of which, from my perspective, apply to my preferred version, the Japanese. However, in a similar way to 4Kids' treatment of One Piece and Funimation's approach to Dragon Ball Z in Steins Gate, it would be silly of me to not talk about the effects the English dub had on the reputation of GT. I am a full believer in the idea that people are allowed to watch whatever they enjoy. However, I am also a full believer in the idea that Funimation certainly took their creative liberties in dubbing the Dragon Ball franchise. Ew, I think I should stop beating around the bush and get to the point already, that being the fact that personally, I do not enjoy the dubs of the Dragon Ball franchise. Well, not enjoy is putting it lightly. Frankly, I absolutely hate them. Disregarding the voices and music, which is completely subjective, it is indisputable fact that in terms of accuracy, the English dub is far from where it should be. Lines are changed to an extent where characters barely resemble their original incarnation, countless jokes are censored, heaps of unnecessary dialogue is added in an attempt to keep the attention of young children. As someone who very much respects original intent, there is no series of dubs more offensive to me than the Dragon Ball dubs. Now why do I bring this up now? After all, even fans that prefer the English dub of Dragon Ball Z despise GT. Well, that's exactly why. Without sounding condescending, I think it is fair to say that nostalgia does play a big part in how someone enjoys something. It is my personal belief that Dragon Ball GT's dub is very similar in quality to the Dragon Ball Z dub, and dub fans only give GT flack for being terrible because they don't have nostalgia for it. I was speaking with my older brother about how the dub may have affected the reputation of Dragon Ball GT in the West. To that, he had this to say. There's an interesting phenomenon where old people remark that people have gotten worse at driving over the years, even though this isn't really the case. If anything, they've gotten better. Rather, as one becomes older and a more experienced driver, they become more aware of the dangers that were always there. I don't want this to sound like me deliberately picking on all dub fans. Plenty of people have incredibly valid arguments against GT, but I have seen on more than one occasion people who tend to think this way, and I would not be surprised if what I said was honestly the reason. So much about Dragon Ball GT was doomed from the start. From its poorly localized adaptation to its unfortunate premiere date, there definitely are a lot of reasons to hate GT. I personally don't, but even saying something as simple as Dragon Ball GT was actually a good show is sometimes a stretch. I wouldn't have made this video if I believed that it was genuinely great, but that is not what I intended to do today. I wanted to present what went wrong alongside some personal opinions of mine, and I believe I've done a good job. Honestly, I'm glad I got to talk about a facet of the franchise that I appreciate, especially due to the fact that I don't typically see this kind of content. At the end of the day, people are allowed to like whatever they like, the same way that they're allowed to dislike whatever they want to dislike. If you think GT sucks, that's fine by me. If you think Super is a great show, you can happily enjoy it. However, there is one final thing that I would like to say before I end this video that I hope you take to heart. The Para brothers are genuinely funny. This is not a joke, I really feel that way, and if you don't feel the same, then there is legitimately something wrong with you.